Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Big news for Georgia yesterday, as the four-star edge rusher Khamari Brooks makes his pledge to UGA Known Fun ceremony. We were thrilled to be a part of that. We will relive some of the best moments from that here today, and also, as we do, talk about what might be coming next for Georgia on the recruiting front. Heavy recruiting on today's show because we are kind of in the midst of so much of that. Also, a programming note, Jake Fromm normally joins us here on Tuesdays in the show. Jake is actually enjoying a little bit of vacation time here this week, so we're going to let him do that and look forward to catching up with Jake again in the very near future. We do have a fun conversation, though, coming up with Connor Riley today. I think you're going to enjoy that. So, a lot out there for Georgia as it continues in its pursuit of an elite class. Also, there was one that got away yesterday. We'll give you some details on that. And, by the way, we'll talk about, I think, one of the wildest sort of like bulletin board type quotes kind of preseason that we've seen in quite some time. We'll give you that before we're done today, and more hard times for Georgia rival too. So we're all over all of that. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It was an awesome day yesterday for DawgNation there at North Oconee High School, Bogart, Georgia. We're going to relive some of the best moments of that here coming up in a moment, and we'll do that in mind of we got maybe more of those coming over the course of the next couple of days. So much fun stuff set to go down as it relates to Georgia and its 2026 class, and a big moment yesterday, which we'll relive here in just a moment. But there is a little bit of kind of an unofficial tradition around DawgNation, which is after some big news, okay, well, what's coming next? Now, as you define next in the immediate, well, that's announcement will come today, and a couple that'll come, the next few days, and we'll, of course, chronicle all that for you here. But I think it's also kind of note, anytime there seems to be some movement with Georgia and a potential five-star prospect, feels like it's appropriate to sort of kind of highlight some of that here right now. Obviously, we know, going back, a few weeks ago now, I guess, there was one that got away for Georgia that a lot of us had really grown to like. That's Mark Bowman, tight end from out in California. He decided to stay in his home state. He's going to USC. We're led to believe it was just an exorbitant financial offer on the part of USC that resulted in Bowman, kind of sticking, in California and going to USC instead of what we believe likely would have happened, him coming to Georgia. But ultimately, you kind of move on from that because at Georgia, there's always another opportunity to kind of go out and get an elite prospect. One of the things that we've said is that we believe here in state, a name that we've grown to really be impressed with as well. And this for us kind of ran concurrent to whatever was going to happen with Mark Bowman. Bowman was a guy that justifiably was getting a lot of attention, kind of five-star bona fides, and a guy that I think could be an immediate impact player. And the hype that has existed around Bowman was legitimate, but at the same time that people were showing a lot of love to Bowman, we were right there, of course, doing that too. We were also showing a lot of love for a guy like Kaiden Prothro as well. And the comparison I've made for Prothro in the past is a little bit like a guy like, say, DeMello Jones kind of really became a lot more on my radar because of a couple of years ago how he played in the state championship game that was on TV, game that a lot of people got to see. When you saw him doing battle that day against, it was Prince Avenue who he's playing, when you saw that happen, I remember coming away thinking, gosh, this young man, already liked him, already thought he was a good prospect, but he's an even better athlete than I believe that I realize that he is. It's, sometimes you have these moments that sort of crystallize a thought for you in a way that perhaps had not done before, and that's kind of the way that I felt about Jones a couple of years ago. Well, this past December, I had sort of a similar kind of reaction just sort of seeing Kaiden Prothro, and it wasn't any specific moment or highlight play, although there were many of those. It's just the overall vibe you got from the young man of, my gosh, this is one of the best athletes in the state, regardless of position. It seems like for whatever reason, last couple of years, the state of Georgia has been really good at producing the sort of dynamic tight end. I've had coaches, and this is interesting, I don't know how true this is, but coaches have told me this. They believe that in some form or fashion, Brock Bowers at Georgia and the great success he had as the very athletic tight end has sort of spawned some copycats a bit. Like I said, I don't know if that's true or if it's just a coincidence, but there are coaches who sort of think that the prevalence of the presence of Bowers at Georgia has created a prevalence of Bowers-like tight ends, athletes who could essentially be receivers, who may sort of officially be tight ends or whatever else, that the Bowers model is now being kind of employed by a lot of programs across Georgia if they do have an athlete that could at least be similar in that category. Well, one of those guys is probably Kaiden Prothro. And the interesting news to give you today is that we now have a commitment date for Prothro. It's July 12th. Now, you know this, many of you do, that we are now moving into a dead period for visits. You're not going to be able to visit in July. You're not going to be able to visit in August. So while it is a dead period for visits, that doesn't mean that guys who've previously taken their visits can't make their commitment announcement. So the same way we're seeing flurries of announcements here to conclude June, they're not prohibited from making announcements in July, despite the fact that July, of course, is a dead period for visits. So we'll still see some news for Georgia taking place in July. In fact, we'll see numerous announcements of note for Georgia in the month of July, and one of those is Kaiden Prothro. And I'm happy to tell you today is that as Prothro gets ready to make his commitment on July 12th, and this stuff changes, we've in fact seen predictions for Georgia get kind of flipped at the last minute right before a player made a different decision than some thought he was going to make. So we're always on guard for anything, but it is at least interesting to note here, now that we know the commitment date for Prothro, the 5-star tight end here from Bowden in-state in Georgia. We also have, and I'll show you this on the screen, from our friends at On3, Chad Simmons, Steve Wiltfong weighing in this, respected voices, both of them are, of course. Their predictions, they don't call these crystal balls. What do they call these? I think they just call them predictions, right? That Kaiden Prothro will land at Georgia. So respected names, a lot of sources, a lot of information. These respected voices, Simmons and Wiltfong, both predicting Prothro to land at Georgia. Now, July 12th and the current news cycle of recruiting we live in feels like it could be 100 years from now. So, of course, anything can change, and we're on guard for everything changing. That's just kind of the way that it goes. But we're not going to sort of, also just sort of gloss over what might be good news. You got a commitment date for Prothro. You got big voices out there predicting to come to Georgia, and no doubt we'll have our chance to talk to Jeff Sintel about this week. Jeff, of course, will have Before the Hedges presented by Kroger coming up on Wednesday. We'll also be talking to Jeff with all kinds of commitment announcements set to take place here, too. We're going to cover live Jay Lamar going tomorrow. We're going to do Craig Dandridge going on Thursday. So in the midst of those discussions, no doubt other recruiting news will come up on that, including what the future might be for Prothro. But to sort of simply sum all this up for right now, you love the idea of getting the super athletic tight end. You especially like that when those guys are in state. Could be that Georgia is trending with this 5-star right now. Prothro has a commitment date. Respected voices predicting him to go to Georgia. And we certainly love that here around our program. Now, let me, after saying all that, shift to something slightly different, which is the recruiting win that Georgia got yesterday when it comes to Khamari Brooks, the 4-star edge rusher from North Oconee High School. And I couldn't help but kind of chuckle at a point kind of during this, I don't call it telecast because they're on television, streaming video, the video stream. In my mind, I'm kind of chuckling because so much of this just felt so similar to what we here have done in the past. It really felt like we were doing a commitment ceremony for, like, say, Jalen Walker up in North Carolina, or just down the road from where Brooks made his announcement, a guy like Malachi Starr, because I've seen comparisons. In fact, I believe Jeff Sintel made the comparison yesterday with, like, Azeez Ojulari. There is a certain kind of, archetype of player that Georgia just sort of seems to find, where you listen to the guy speak and you come away thinking, man, I really like this young man. Now, obviously, there's sort of an athletic sort of requisite set of skills that Georgia players must have. Georgia doesn't just recruit, it selects. So from that, level of athleticism, if you've got the athletic specs to play at a place like Georgia, Georgia's also looking to be selective within that category of who really fits the bill for what Georgia's looking for from a player. And there were guys like Starks and Walker, and Jeff mentions Ojulari. There have been guys in recent years where when you sort of hear them and see them and look at the vibe they're giving off, you're just immediately concluding, man, that guy feels like Georgia. And Georgia always seems to find guys who feel like Georgia. Now, of course, not every single player on the roster is going to be as fully bought in as the sort of nucleus. We know that, but you better have a large number of players who do sort of match the nucleus that you're looking for. And Georgia has just done really well with that. And I will admit, I've known Khamari Brooks as a player. I've grown to be very impressed by the North Oconee program. It's sort of been an ascendant program in recent years. But pretty much, and maybe this is just my derelict, but pretty much everything that I knew about Brooks before yesterday was kind of Brooks as a player. In fact, if you're watching on video, you're watching some of this film right now. I think you like the speed with which he gets off the edge. I think you like the way in which he gets after quarterbacks. He's obviously been trained some at North Oconee by David Pollock. That's a matchup that seems like a good fit for Georgia because we remember Pollock as such a great player. Pretty much everything that I knew about Brooks before yesterday, though, was knowing him as a player. When you had a chance after he made the commitment ceremony to Georgia, which, by the way, was sort of brief and to the point, and we're not against the theatrics. We obviously like the hat shows and things like that. We had a blast with Ekene Ogboko the previous week. Drama for recruiting announcements, we're in that business a little bit, so it's to our benefit to have these big, elaborate rollouts. There's a self-serving aspect of that if you're covering these live on video, just to be completely honest. However, when a young man doesn't necessarily want that, when he's only making an announcement, it appears, so he can kind of move on with sort of the next phase of his summer or his high school career or his football life on his way to a place like the University of Georgia. There's something really commendable about that too. It's really magnetic. It attracts you to that guy. And I came away from our ceremony yesterday a much bigger fan of Khamari Brooks than I was going into it. And frankly, I was already a pretty big fan of it. So let me give you a couple of reasons why. We're going to play a couple clips here from Khamari Brooks where, one of the things that he talked about was the notion of maturity. Want to be a mature young man. And I thought so many of the words that he used yesterday, an example of that. Let me give you a little bit of a taste of that right now. You'll like this from Khamari Brooks.
I feel like I knew kind of a couple of days after I took my Alabama visit. I feel like the things that Georgia did throughout my whole process, ever since they kind of picked up that recruitment after my state championship game, I feel like since then the recruitments, they really let me know that I've been the number one guy the whole time. They expressed that a lot throughout, the time they've been recruiting me. The relationship I had with Coach Derribe, he built that relationship on a strong thing. Now we just be able to hang out without it being just football. I feel like that's a big thing. You need to be able to be with your coaches outside of football. I feel like that helps you a lot. So I feel like it's the biggest two things that really helped me make my decision.
That's one of the, I think, the key takeaways from what's being discussed yesterday. I know Connor Riley, who's going to join us here in a moment, has written a story about this at DawgNation.com, that oftentimes a big recruiting win for Georgia also kind of turns into a moment to celebrate the position coach, the individual UGA assistant, who helped kind of pave the way for some of this. And we did that. We've done that recently for a guy like, say, Dante Williams, who I think in this 2026 cycle is making a name for himself in a way that probably did not happen for him in 2025. I think that's probably the case. I think also in this particular moment, when it comes to Khamari Brooks, you're saying the same thing about Chidera Uzo-Deribe, the Georgia outside linebackers coach. And look, oftentimes coaches that get hired at Georgia are coaches that come here already with a certain level of fame. We know something about them when they're hired. There are also moments in which that's not really true, in which, a guy is very young in his career, a guy, doesn't quite have the same profile. And I think for most of us, Uzo-Deribe was not famous before hired at Georgia, but I do think it demonstrates just what Kirby Smart does well. The same way that he seemingly has a scout's eye for talent when it comes to players, I would say that Smart also can demonstrate a scout's eye for talent when it comes to coaches. Who's the guy that's going to have the indefatigable energy? Who's the guy that's going to have that just insatiable appetite for success? Who's the guy who we can kind of leverage his ambition to get that kind of hard driving, push for success while he's here? And Uzo Duribe certainly seems one of those guys. And as Brooks talks about how his relationship with Georgia deepened over time, and Uzo Duribe kind of the face of the program in his eyes, certainly a good day for Jadera to take a bow, and I hope he's gotten a chance to do that. With that in mind, let's also hear more from Khamari Brooks, just sort of talking about this experience and what kind of leads to this Georgia commitment and kind of now where things go from him. Here's Khamari Brooks again.
Anybody let me know that they think that we could get, I'm going to definitely start hitting them up. Jared Curtis, he kind of helped me out. He been texting me, like I said, I know a lot of players. So C.J. Wiley been texting, C.J. Allen, Ethan Barber, Landon. So those guys kind of recruited me throughout my process. So I feel like I'm going to definitely be a big recruit in this class because we want to bring in the best class we possibly can.
I mean, already using we to talk about Georgia, already thinking about who he wants to play with him. I don't think you could have, if you're a Georgia fan, consumed that content yesterday and come away feeling, frankly, any different than I did. That, wow, this is a really special young man who, honestly, as you watch him speak there, if you're listening podcasts or you hear his words, sort of already feels like the kind of Georgia player we're used to seeing Georgia have. And it's that kind of special sauce of ingredients that I think has really gone a long way to kind of create the Georgia success. Athletically, you meet certain characteristics, but also from a locker room standpoint, you kind of meet a different level of need. And it sort of feels like Brooks kind of checks box on both those sides. Clearly a very big recruiting win for Georgia, which leaves Dawg fans excited to celebrate that and also curious about what comes next. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're glad you're with us today, no matter how you get to us, live on video. That's 10 a.m. across all platforms, radio, Athens, Sports Radio 960, The Ref podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really happy to have you with us, and so thankful to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. Listen, I love what ServPro does for so many of you, because here's the thing we kind of understand. In an audience like ours, it's just sort of regular folks who want to live their life and want to, feel comfortable in their home, but also many of you business owners, which means you'd kind of depend on that business for the livelihood. It's how you, put food on your table. It's how you take care of your kids. Or perhaps you've got, some rental property, and it's that passive income that comes from that where, you depend on that, right? It's maybe how you're paying for your kids' college, or it may be how you're funding your retirement, or, things like this. So many of you, in other words, have connection with land, property built on land somehow, some way. The home you live in, the warehouse where your business is, the rental house that you're depending on. And land and property on land oftentimes can be threatened. Like disaster is a fact of life. I'm talking about fire. I'm talking about water intrusion. I'm talking about weather-related catastrophes. These sorts of things can create a huge problem for you. And when you see something like this, I think there's that immediate wish on our part of, can we just back up time and have this never happen? Can we go back and erase all of this and just sort of pretend this never occurred? And obviously, if we could, we would. The next best thing, though, is our friends from ServPro, because they're a restoration specialist. When disaster strikes for you, their restoration specialists want to fix it up, build it back, clean it up, and get it back together looking like it never even happened. This is real work. This is sort of a nasty business sometimes, but this is what the folks at ServPro live to do, rolling up their sleeves, getting into the muck and mire with you, and getting your property, whether it's your home, your warehouse, your rental property, whatever else it is, getting it put together, cleaned back up, and getting it looking like it never even happened. I think an important aspect to remember here in the conversation about ServPro, each ServPro franchise independently owned and operated. That means you're not dealing with some sort of conglomerate from, across the globe. You're dealing with a person in your community whose, kind of outcome they seek satisfaction for, just like you seek it for yourself, because that's what their business is based on. The kind of word of mouth stories of folks who said, yeah, I use ServPro. Glad they did that for me. And, you can see the before and after pictures, and it kind of tells the tale all on its own. That is what ServPro is all about. So when damage strikes whatever you're dealing with, your home, your warehouse, your rental property, whatever it might be, and you need it put back together looking like it never even happened, I want you to trust the restoration specialists of ServPro to make that be the case. You can find them online. It's servpro.com. SERV, servpro.com for a lot more on that today. All right, we are glad to have all of you with us here today. Let me give you a quick programming note, which is that normally on a Tuesday for us, we get a chance to, and it's always a great privilege, to speak to the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Jake enjoying a little bit of vacation this week. Now, listen, Jake, to his credit, was like, BA, I'm all ready to go. I'm going to join you from the beach or whatever it is that he is. And I said, Jake, don't do that. Just enjoy your time off. You deserve that. You've had a busy year. You got a lot going on, young family. You enjoy them. And, frankly, I know how much my wife would strangle me if I tried to, do a bunch of work while we were on vacation. So I don't want to get Jake in trouble with his family. So I said, you enjoy your family, and we'll look forward to catching up with you here very, very soon. So we'll do that with Jake Fromm in the very near future. We're also going to catch up in the immediate future with Connor Riley in a couple of minutes. We'll talk to Connor more about Khamari Brooks yesterday, what might be on the way with others. We'll do a lot of recruiting talk plus some other stuff with Connor Riley in just a moment. But prior to that, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today. And I want to give you a couple of other recruiting notes just for a moment. Let me start with this. Yesterday there was not necessarily unexpected, but bad news nonetheless for Georgia's 2026 class. Vance Spafford, receiver from California, who has been in the class now for quite some time. Well, he is no longer in the class. Spafford does flip from Georgia to Miami. Now, there's a little bit of a sort of a weird addendum to this, in that Spafford was supposed to visit Miami this past weekend. It was announced that he was not visiting. And to give you an idea, and this is what some fans don't like, and I'm not just talking about like sort of sour grapes if he's not coming to Georgia, but there is a little bit of a disconnect in the recruiting process now with the way that recruiting has sometimes been done. Not always, but sometimes there is. This is one of those things that I think sort of agitates fans a little bit. Is that used to be, well, if so-and-so's not taking the visit, that means he's definitely not coming to your school. But in this day and age of sort of a little bit more transactional-based recruiting, all of a sudden now the not taking the visit is probably not quite as important as perhaps it once was. And Miami apparently has one. Not apparently, they have. Spafford is now committed to Miami after not visiting there this past weekend. There's seemingly a lot to like about Spafford as a player. It has seemed true for quite some time that the relationship with George and Spafford, it just didn't quite seem as top of mind, maybe for either party, as it sort of previously had been. So I think there had been some thought that Spafford was perhaps trending away from Georgia. Maybe going out west or staying out west or something like that. But as it stands now, it is a flip from Georgia to Miami for Vance Spafford. Of course, Georgia's got more irons in the fire when it comes to receiver position. We told you we're on top of other announcements coming up here this week, including on Thursday, Craig Dandridge. That's the wide receiver from Cambridge. You'll remember this. I think it was Friday. On Friday's show, we showed you like some highlights of Dandridge at the Corky Kell Dave Hunter 7-on-7 event that's been going on this summer. And he's making big highlight catches there. This is one of those guys that is really, I would say, his profile is really growing, becoming a little bit more of a top-of-mind target for Georgia by a lot of Georgia fans. So the Dandridge news now gets more important, more interesting based on the fact that Spafford is going elsewhere. I think they're probably slightly different players, but nonetheless, just more attention on this receiver decision coming up because of what goes down there with Vance Spafford. And of course, while we're in the midst of commitment for Georgia on Sunday with Shadarius Tootle, commitment yesterday for Khamari Brooks, DawgNation going to have live coverage of Jay Lamar tomorrow, and then, as I said, of Dandridge on Thursday. Don't forget, tonight also, Georgia fans will have their eye down on Valdosta, Georgia, down 75, where Corey Howard, big-time defensive prospect for the class of 2026, he is getting ready to make his announcement. This is a guy that play up front for Georgia defensively. If he were to choose UGA, and Georgia's kind of in the thick of this announcement for Howard coming up later on this evening. So it is conceivable that Georgia could get a commitment every day this week. Like that's how busy this is. Now, that may not happen, but they could. And if that is going to happen, then obviously the next domino to fall would be Howard here today. So we're obviously going to be watching that very closely. So you were promised it was going to be a busy week for Georgia recruiting. I would say thus far that's worked out to be exactly as we thought that it would. And so the next potential domino, one worth watching there, is Howard going on later on this evening. We'll make that around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Now, coming up in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk to Connor Riley about this. We'll do more on kind of the what's next on the Vance Spafford thing. And I would say one of the things that we may also kind of expand ourselves on just a bit is the fact that Georgia is still producing an elite recruiting class. They're ranked number 2 right now, even though overall it does seem like we are seeing a little bit of a greater dispersion of, elite top-level recruits going to various places. Somehow Georgia, in the midst of all of that, is still kind of finding enough to stay at that elite level. And I think that Georgia does deserve some commending for that. So we'll talk to Connor Riley about that. Also, before we're done, a Georgia rival who we kind of laughed at yesterday, even more bad news for them today. We will give that to you. And frankly, this is going to sound like an oversell, don't mean for it to. One of the wildest pieces of bulletin board material I have seen in quite some time. This is pretty out there as far as I'm concerned, so we'll give you that. And another important recruiting update on another targeted note for Georgia. So we're busy before we're done here today. But for now, Khamari Brooks commits, what might be coming next, everything in between. Let's talk to Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley here. And, Connor, I think I comment a lot of this a little bit maybe different than you do. Don't really think of myself as a reporter. We always say the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And so, obviously we root for Georgia around here. We hope they have success. And it's always nice for me when a player that I sort of know only as a player, when I get to know them a little bit more as a person, it's kind of nice to like what you see. And I'll be honest with you, Khamari Brooks is the guy who I wanted Georgia to get because I'd seen some of the Huddle film and had been familiar with him because of, North Oconee winning the state championship. But I really had not paid that much attention to his words necessarily. I'd not really focused in on that very much. But boy, I found those to be really magnetic yesterday. And the point that I think I made on yesterday's broadcast, I made on today's show, it kind of fits in that category for me of, guys like Malachi Starks or Jalen Walker, Azeez Ojulari, who Jeff mentioned. And, obviously it remains to be seen if he'll be as good as a football player as those guys became. But guys were sort of mature beyond their years who seem to contribute to locker room culture as much as they contribute to the on-field product. I think you have to have guys like that if you want to be as good a program as you can be. And boy, Khamari Brooks, with the way in which he went about all of his business yesterday and the way that he spoke, about his own process of committing to Georgia, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you watch that closely. I just think you come away knowing more about him and liking him more than you perhaps did going into it if all you knew about him prior to yesterday was his recruiting ranking.
Yeah, it's easy in this day and age with NIL and everything in play to be more distracted. You see these big-time recruitments where guys are all over the place and you're hearing about late offers and where guys might be going. It's very easy to understand and sympathize with the 17-year-old, 18-year-old dealing with that. And I think that's what makes what Brooks did and the way he went about handling his recruitment, I think, stand out all the more. This was a guy who was very businesslike. It started out, it seemed like USC, Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia were going to be the teams in the running for his recruitment. He knocks USC off pretty quickly. Then Clemson sort of falls by the wayside. And it seems like either Alabama or Georgia. And I know Alabama's a little different in this day and age post Nick Saban, but this was a very businesslike approach. And then to hear Brooks speak afterwards and hear him elaborate why it was Georgia and how Chidera Uzo-Diribe went about recruiting him. He fits so frequently, not just with what we've seen with this Georgia team and recruits they've gotten in the past, but even those outside linebackers, those edge rushers. You think Azeez Ojulari, Nolan Smith, maybe the ultimate example of that. Even Jalen Walker a year ago, even though he played inside linebacker, I think had that outside linebacker edge mentality to him. And there's something to that. And all of the, with the exception of Ojulari, Smith and Walker were first round picks. Ojulari went in the second round. There's something to be said about having that type of mindset and turning that into being a successful player at the University of Georgia, and ultimately going on to be a first round or high level draft pick. Brooks, top 100-ish level recruit. I wouldn't be surprised to see him rise in the rankings a little bit and get into that top 100 mark. But make no mistake, this was the number one guy on Georgia's board at this position this year. And they absolutely landed a player that I think is going to be very, very important to the fabric of this Georgia team moving forward.
So you wrote about Chidera Uzodiribe this morning at DawgNation.com. I'm glad you did, because I think he was one of the big winners from yesterday, of course. And it's one of the things that over the years I've harped on a lot. I don't think people realize that this is a lot more difficult than it appears, because there are not enough assistant coaches to go around. The same way there's always going to be a scarcity of elite players. Like, there are just not a lot of, to use a phrase that I probably shouldn't use, there are not a lot of coaches who want this smoke, right? Where it's like you get criticized for like the littlest thing. You got to win big in recruiting battles. I mean, like, you get well paid, but it comes with a major, major price in terms of you just got to be able to live with the pressure. And there are a lot of guys who just don't want it. Some guys go to the NFL. Some guys, frankly, at the lower level of college coaching, they're kind of gravitating back towards high school. It's just like, the idea of, hey, I want to be what a college football assistant coach requires me to be. That's always been kind of a scarce number of coaches who really can thrive in that environment. I would say that's probably a shorter list now than it used to be. So when Kirby Smart kind of finds someone who, and I try to follow this stuff pretty closely, but Chidera Uzodiribe was not famous to me before he was hired at Georgia. Other Georgia coaches that were also not famous to me have turned out to be very good ones. When Kirby Smart seemingly has as much of an eye for scouting coaching talent as he does for scouting player talent, I just think that's the kind of thing that should be noticed, because and I promise I'll let you talk, but like, there was a time in which, years ago, like, the same group of assistants just sort of bounced from job to job to job, because they're like the ones that we knew were sort of SEC level assistants. But eventually you got to find the next generation of SEC level assistants. Smart just seems to be pretty good at that. I think that's worth praising him for.
Think about the job that Chidera Uzodiribe stepped into and who he was replacing.
Yes.
I think Dan Lanning has as high of approval rating among Georgia fans as anyone for what he did in his time here. Now, Dan did not do a good job leaving that room well stocked in the future. Yes, Chidera had Nolan Smith to work with in the first year, but beyond that, they weren't exactly bringing in the guys that Chidera is bringing in now. And the way that he has built up that room over time has been so impressive. And like, this year is going to be a real interesting test in terms of what Chidera can do to bring to the field and turn a very young and raw group into productive players. But like, Chaz Chambliss had 6.5 sacks last year. I don't think there's a Georgia fan out there that envisioned him turning into that level of a disruptive player. And he became a very important piece on that team last year. I'm fascinated to see what Uzodiribe is going to do with Elo Madozi this year and how he gets the most out of him. A year ago, we knew Georgia needed to load up in the edge rusher class. They needed to go out and get dudes. Isaiah Gibson, Chase Litton, Darren Akinabon all qualify as that. And like, you look at the guys that he lost from this room this past offseason, Damon Wilson going to Missouri, Samuel Mpemba going to Texas A&M. They left for reasons that I don't fully put on Uzodiribe. And the important thing to keep in mind with Georgia's outside linebackers and edge rushers, they're not always the most productive players. And so you have to find a way, I think, to work around that, because it is absolutely used against Georgia in recruiting. And so the fact that Uzodiribe has been able to navigate that and land big-time player after big-time player, Khamari Brooks, the latest example of that, speaks to why I think he has been such a positive addition, even in a world where, he's now going into his fourth year. He's not exactly a new name on the block for Georgia, but this is a guy that is an absolute stud at his position and elite in his role.
So you kind of touch on something I wanted to ask you about, which is, all of that said, this is like one of the few position groups for Georgia that hasn't been like eye-popping elite. And I say that somewhat carefully because, in 2020, Azeez Ojulari did have, I would say, a phenomenal season, probably statistically speaking. But that's kind of like the one example of that. A lot of that came in a bowl game against Cincinnati. There's also a pandemic. I think people kind of forget that. But the probably best individual season for an edge rusher in the Kirby Smart era was probably, I think, Ojulari in that particular year. The one guy who became a first-round pick, Nolan Smith, it's worth noting, he was injured for a lot of the year in which he became a first-round pick. So in a roundabout way, that even kind of has a little bit of an asterisk next to it. If Georgia did achieve an edge rusher the same way it achieves the other positions, then it's probably game over, go home. Like, no one's going to compete with Georgia if they do on the outside edge what they do at other spots. But I do think there is some curiosity among fans of, okay, are they going to break out and have the big edge rushing individual season? Because in a lot of ways, that does kind of feel like the final frontier for a Georgia defense.
Yeah, and part of the difficulty with that, I think, is that they haven't been able to get to those young players, those big-time recruits, to become older players. You know, they only signed one outside linebacker in the 2021 class in Chaz Chambliss. That next year when Dan Lanning leaves, it's a little bit of a transition class. And so it's no surprise that guys like Marvin Jones and Darius Smith, who were promising players, ultimately finished their college careers elsewhere. And then this past offseason, like, there's no sugarcoating how big of a loss I think Damon Wilson was. And I understand why he went to Missouri. I think Georgia would have loved to keep him, but things transpired the way in which they did. And that's why I think it's so important for this young group that he has right now. You know, I don't know if we're going to see them beat elite players in 2025. If they are, watch out. But can you see Elo Madozi become an SEC level player as he makes the transition from Army? Can we see Gabe Harris go from a guy that flashes on both the defensive line and outside linebacker to being a down by down contributor? What do we see out of Quintavious Johnson? And then the really big thing are these three freshmen that he has, Isaiah Gibson, Chase Litton, and Darren Akinabon, who have all the physical tools. Are they going to stick around and develop over the course of 4 years? Because if they do and they pan out, all the questions about this outside linebacker room are going to be answered, and they're going to be resounding yeses. These guys are elite.
And I don't want to just stick on this topic the entire time, but I am fascinated by it because you mentioned Elo Madozi. And listen, Elo Madozi may go on to be, the leader of this defense this year. Certainly seems like he's a pretty impressive young man. But, the internet has just loved Madozi ever since it was announced he was coming to Georgia. I would say this is sort of a new category of offseason content that didn't used to exist prior to player agents, but we'll figure all that out. I guess I've sort of wondered, can Madozi come in and just sort of elevate the edge rusher spot at Georgia beyond what it's been? My assumption is Georgia's going to be very glad to have him. My assumption is he's going to probably feel like a Georgia player while playing here. But this idea is going to be, as some have suggested, best pass rusher in the SEC. For me, I just keep coming back to that's not really been the profile of what a Georgia outside linebacker has been. And so I've been a little bit, I guess, curious about the level of praise that exists for Madozi because, listen, I celebrate his arrival. I'm glad that Georgia's got him. Georgia needed more depth at the outside linebacker spot. But, is Madozi going to be really the guy that sort of changes the way in which we think about this position? Because that'd be really something if that were to be true.
If Madozi just does what he did at Army last season, where he gets 6.5 sacks, Georgia and Georgia fans should be over the moon with what he was able to do and come in and contribute to year one. I think that's on the high end of at least my own personal expectations of what Madozi can do. In reality, I think the most important thing about Madozi and what he brings to the table for this Georgia outside linebacker room is that it allows Georgia to be flexible with Gabe Harris, and they don't have to pigeonhole him because I think his positional versatility, I think, is going to be very important for this defense as they're going to be able to move him and match him up to whatever the opposing defense is doing. And so the fact that you can have Madozi and Harris potentially on the field at the same time, I think is really big for a very young Georgia defense. I understand why Madozi has gotten hyped the way that he does and the way that he has. Georgia needed an outside linebacker. This was the guy they targeted in the spring portal, despite other big names, Bo Atkinson, who ended up at Ohio State, being available. If I had to bet, Bo Atkinson is probably going to have more sacks next season than Madozi will. But the big thing with Madozi is, can he come in? Can he be a contributor right away? And maybe not necessarily be a productive player, but be a player that can stay on the field, set the edge, make the right play time and time again.
I think that's really interesting. You wrote a story at DawgNation.com to change the subject here. You wrote a story the other day that I thought was really interesting, looking at 8 potential pass catchers for Georgia that could lead the team in receiving. I think this is, from a premise standpoint, I think it's true. I think there are a lot of guys who could be that guy for Georgia. And I see that as both a good and, potentially not quite so good thing because it gives you a lot of candidates to sort of step to the forefront. But we have a tendency in the offseason, Connor, on our show and with Georgia fans, we sort of bet the over on everybody, and that kind of oftentimes does not quite turn out to be true, that you could have 8 potential leading receivers, 8 potential all SEC style pass catchers, and yet if they all just sort of achieve at kind of an expected level, well, sometimes that doesn't quite add up to quite enough. So I sort of see this as sort of two sides of the same coin of, on the one side, boy, that's great news, man. Georgia's got a lot of bodies being thrown at a problem, which is the need for upgraded receiver play. At the same time, the sort of lack of known commodities, I think, does create a little bit of angst on the part of Georgia fans. Where do you kind of come down on that discussion?
Yeah, and look, 8 might be stretching it. I think a lot of people might be surprised if London Humphreys leads this team in receiving this year. I think the same could potentially be said for Talon Taylor. But I think you hit the nail on the head in that, yes, it's great, and especially with where Georgia's receiver room was last year, and even in parts of the 2023 season, to have that number of options, I think it's very encouraging in the offseason. How do these guys develop? Because we know Georgia's not going to lean and consistently spread the ball out to 8 guys. We've traditionally seen them get down to around 5 or 6 options. And yes, I did include tight ends Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp in that 8. I'm fascinated to see who emerges as the go-to target for Gunnar Stockton. When I say that, I'm not necessarily talking about the leading receiver like Arian Smith was a season ago, but 3rd and 6 and they need a play made. Who's getting the ball in that situation? Is it a Lawson Lucky? Is it an Oscar Delp? Is it a Zachariah Branch potentially? I'm curious to see how it all plays out. And I think the really encouraging thing about this team this year, especially compared to last year in this group of receivers, well, yes, they're going to have to sort out who is the number one option. They have guys who have overlapping skill sets in a way I don't think they necessarily did a season ago. So you can always have one of Colby Young and Noah Thomas out there at the X position on the outside. You can always have one of London Humphreys or Dylan Bell moving around the formation there. I'll be interested to see what we see out of Talon Taylor and how he develops as a freshman. How frequently is Zachariah Branch used in this offense, especially considering I think he's going to be an important player as a return specialist. So yes, there's a lot of options. They've got to sort out before the season starts who is going to be the guy for Gunnar Stockton, who ultimately emerges. Maybe not as the statistical leader in terms of yards, but when you need a play made and everyone in the stadium, including the opposing team, knows it, who's going to be able to get open, win, and make a big play for the quarterback?
So let me, I guess, kind of finish this conversation by saying this. I'm not, air quotes, that worried about Georgia offensively. I think that Gunnar Stockton is going to be kind of a typical Georgia starting quarterback with his overall stat line, because through 9 years of Kirby Smart, that's sort of what he produces, a certain sort of baseline level of achievement. I see no reason after 6 quarters of postseason play to think that Stockton won't at least be what a typical Georgia starting quarterback is, even if he's obviously, inexperienced compared to other guys in this league. I do like a lot of these pass-catching targets you just described. I think there's the chance that better offensive line play produces better overall running game. In other words, Georgia needs offensive improvement compared to where it was a year ago. I just don't think it's like that big of a leap to think it could occur. My big concern for Georgia is relative to the schedule it's playing, will that be enough? It's kind of the same worry I had last year, which is, hey, Georgia may be good. It may even be better than it was last year, but tougher regular season schedule, longer, more challenging postseason. It still may not be good enough to meet the moment if you want to achieve your end-of-season goals, because you're just asked to play more difficult games than you used to be asked to play. That's still my biggest concern. But overall, I mean, I'll be pretty surprised if this team doesn't show pretty remarkable offensive improvement compared to where it was a year ago. What do you think about all of that?
For me, it's just as simple as, does this offensive line come together in a way it didn't a season ago? Because it just didn't. And injuries were a big part of that. I think you had a lot of veterans who were maybe more worried about their future. We've heard Monroe Freeling and players discuss that. I think Tate Ratledge missing time in the beginning of the season with that ankle injury in the Kentucky game had a profound impact on how this group was unable to come together. And so if this group is able to stay healthy, I like the talent that they have. I was really high on Ernest Green a season ago before he dealt with injuries there at the left tackle position. Monroe Freeling is a big-time recruit and a guy that traditionally has had a lot of success at Georgia. They are giving him the left tackle job, and I'm fascinated to see what he does with more playing time. I've been on record that I think Drew Bobo is going to be a better center than Jared Wilson, even though Jared Wilson was just taken in the 3rd round in the most recent NFL draft. And I'm as high as anyone on Daniel Calhoun on the Georgia beat. So I like the individual talent here. The question is, can this group come together? Because if they are, I think that's going to help in the running game. I like the running back room more this year than I did a year ago because of the diversity that you have with Joshua McCray now in the fold. And if you're able to run the ball better and you're able to turn those 3rd and 7s into 3rd and 4s more consistently, that's going to open things up for this Georgia offense, I think, in a very big way. And that's the biggest thing. And so it just comes down to, can this offensive line turn, a 2-yard gain on 1st down into a 5-yard gain on 1st down? And if they're able to do that, I do think that even with a more difficult schedule, you're going to see enough improvement to where even if Georgia finishes with the same regular season record at the end of the year with 10-2, you're probably going to feel a good bit better about it than you did at the end of last season, where it felt so much like a slog throughout the year.
No, I think that's really interesting. Connor, great stuff. We appreciate your coverage at DawgNation.com, your thoughts here on our program, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. I'm sure we'll hear from you as Georgia chases after a couple of big commits here the rest of the week. Of course, potential Corey Howard tonight. Tomorrow you start thinking about the running back Jay Lamar, Craig Dandridge on Thursday. A lot of recruiting stuff to follow here in the days to come, so we're looking forward to doing that, and I'm sure we'll hear from you around that too. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah. Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Great stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff there from Connor Riley on everything going on. And, of course, as we said, we got live coverage tomorrow for Jay Lamar, Craig Dandridge on Thursday. We're watching Corey Howard tonight. A lot going on as it relates to UGA recruiting. And, of course, Connor is a big part of our coverage on all of that, too. So we certainly appreciate that. Glad to have him here on the show today. Also, normally on Tuesdays, we told you before, it's Jake Fromm. No Jake today. We'll get Jake here again very soon. For now, though, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And you sort of feel the summer vibe in the air. Now, we're getting closer to the start of the season, but around here, we don't do anything to sort of wish the summer away. We love it, and for so many of you, it's your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation that gets you excited during the summer. And what I love to hear is many of you also have your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations planned for like the fall. I heard from one of our YouTube commenters that he's going to be on Star of the Seas coming up in September. That's the brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship. And actually, if you're sailing on Star in September, you're among the first to be a part of it because it's going to debut here in August, relatively late in August. That means, some of our folks are going to be among the very first to be on Star of the Seas, and we're going to really lean on you to come back and tell us all about it because we think it's one of the most exciting introductions into the cruise space in quite some time. And one of the things I love about Star of the Seas so much is that when the original Icon class of ship, Icon of the Seas, when it debuted, it was in the port of Miami, of course, and that's exciting. You love going down there. But my home port is really, it's really Port Canaveral. That's the closest port to where we live here in Georgia. It's the easiest one to drive to, and just love it. And the fact that we're going to have an Icon class of ship, we're going to have Star of the Seas here at Port Canaveral, kind of an easy drive from where we are. I tell you, man, I am so excited about all of that, and I'm encouraging so many of you to take advantage of this opportunity. So give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready for a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. As we head towards the end of 2025, looking into early 2026, she can get you ready to go on all of that. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC today, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, we gave you a commitment date earlier for Kaiden Prothro of July 12th. It's important to know on that same date, not only will Prothro make his announcement, but Derreck Cooper, the outstanding running back who took a visit to Georgia recently that, by all descriptions, seemed to go well. Cooper getting ready to also make his announcement that same day. Now, we are watching closely for Jay Lamar, running back tomorrow from Colquitt County. So Georgia will be in on a running back prior to Cooper. It's also been kind of thought, I believe, among many recruiting experts that Cooper might be a little bit of a tough pull for Georgia, just being honest. But also Georgia remains a big factor in this recruitment. So we're watching both Lamar for this on Wednesday, Cooper coming up in July. Georgia running back recruiting will be in the spotlight here over the course of the next few weeks. Now, let me shift to a different recruiting story involving a different program. We talked yesterday about what has gone on with Auburn and Shadarius Tootle flipping from Auburn to Georgia, and the fact that if you're a Georgia fan, you love kind of getting over on one of your rivals, and you certainly do. But the other thing we kind of notice here on this is that for an Auburn program, who I do genuinely believe can be a turnaround team in the SEC here this year, boy, hard not to notice that there's almost no recruiting momentum as a precursor to that. And a statement if you've been with us for a long time, you've perhaps heard me say before. I believe that recruits are always the first to notice what's truly going on with the program. If it's trending up, the recruits who are invited to be on the inside of the program will perhaps see evidence of that, even if it's not apparent to those of us on the outside. And when a program is set to turn south, oftentimes you'll see the recruits kind of sort of create some distance between themselves and that program before it's apparent to fans and media. Sometimes recruits know when things kind of heading for a downturn. So obviously recruiting wins and on-field wins are not directly connected to each other, but sometimes success leaves clues. You've heard me maybe say that before too. And if Auburn really is looking for an upcoming fall in which they're going to have more success than they've had in the past, I think one of the questions I would ask is, where are the clues that that's true? Tootle flipping yesterday. Did you see the story of Devin Carter? Now, Carter's a guy I like, receiver from Douglas County. It's a program that's had very good receivers. Carter is certainly among those. Longtime Auburn commit. Then yesterday, Carter flipped to Florida State. And now you're talking about an Auburn program. Do I have this right? I think they're ranked sort of like outside the top 60 or something like this. In recruiting here right now, there's almost no momentum at all for them really whatsoever. And if you talk to Auburn fans about this, one of the things they'll say, and I don't know if it's true or not, it's just kind of I think the prevailing wisdom is that Auburn was pretty aggressive in the transfer portal, and perhaps, like all programs do now, had to be really aggressive with trying to keep some of its own players. And when you have a situation like that where you have roster holes, you have to spend big on transfers, but you can't afford to let your guys that you do like go elsewhere. I think there's some Auburn fans who sort of think that Auburn is just poor right now and when it comes to recruiting, that in this kind of transactional recruiting age in which we live at the moment, Auburn perhaps just doesn't quite have the financial wherewithal to kind of go out and get these recruits. So from that standpoint, what they're not getting in recruiting right now is perhaps not a harbinger of doom for the season to come, because most people look at Jackson Arnold coming over from Oklahoma quarterback and think he could be working in the Hugh Freeze offensive system perhaps pretty good, or bringing in Singleton, the wide receiver from Tech, to go along with Coleman and the other freshmen they have, and bring in the guy from Wake Forest. Pretty good at receiver, for instance, this year. There's been some hype. As I said before, I was joking with Connor about this earlier. We live in an age of hyped transfers that didn't used to exist kind of prior to like the player agent era. Another example of that is the offensive lineman that comes to Auburn via Virginia Tech, who we're told, maybe this guy's going to be a first-round pick. There's that kind of category of news report, I would say, that didn't used to exist. But either way, Auburn has been pretty successful in the transfer portal. To hear some Auburn fans tell it, they used all that money on transfers, and now they got no money to give to these recruits, which means that in what is kind of a desperate year for Auburn, if it does work out and if they do have the turnaround, they may be more desperate than ever next year to find new players to help replicate that. That right now they're kind of operating on a very short-term basis, which is a little bit concerning. But clearly right now the Tigers have zero recruiting momentum. Hard not to notice that. Now, speaking of Florida State, let me give you one more story here. So we're getting ready for a big Florida State-Alabama non-conference game to kind of get going in the 2025 season. And for Florida State, they are seeking also a turnaround after a disastrous 2024. Now, one of the things that Mike Norvell, the Florida State coach, has leveraged, probably more so than high school recruiting, although they're on a little bit of a hot streak right now. He's been more of a portal guy than a high school guy. That's one of the reasons why Florida State fans have been a little kind of not so sure of the situation. And just being honest, That may be the biggest reason that Mike Norvell's not the Alabama coach today. A guy who knew the lay of the land in the South and was maybe a little bit more familiar to Bama fans than Kalen DeBoer would have been. I don't think Alabama thought Norvell was a great recruiter, and I think that may be a big reason that Norvell today is not the Alabama coach after maybe at one point in time kind of being thought of as a potential candidate for that. Well, he'll get his chance to prove Alabama wrong if Alabama really did, not show a lot of interest in him as the coach when these two teams play. And once again, leaning on a transfer quarterback, Florida State is trying to get this done. It's Thomas Castellanos. You may know him as the former Ware County Gator. Been at Boston College, now coming to Florida State, interviewed by Pete Nakos, and he has said some wild stuff. Let me read this a little bit. So Castellanos telling Nakos, I'm excited, man. People I don't know if they know, but you go back and watch every first game that I've played in. We always start fast. I dreamed of moments like this. I dreamed of playing against Alabama. They don't have Nick Saban to save them. I just don't see them stopping me. Now, this is the sort of thing where we live in a time in which there's a lot of, this time of year, fake social media posts. Used to be fake tweets. I'm sure it's, fake Instagram stuff where some random account will just make up some crazy quote and just kind of put it out there and it gets a million retweets. And I think the purpose of these fake quotes is to have media people kind of pick up the fake quote and kind of run with it. It's just people who think that's funny. In this particular case, I'm reading this directly from the On3 website, Pete Nakos, the reporter. I've not been duped by a fake quote. This is directly from, on3.com here. Nakos, quoting the new Florida State quarterback, is saying that Alabama, who they'll play week 1, doesn't have Nick Saban to save them, and that he doesn't view Alabama as being able to stop him. What a thing for a guy to say. Now, on the one hand, I'm not mad when people say interesting things. I guess as a media person, I probably like that. It's kind of fun. On the other hand, though, this is why Kirby Smart has always been so careful with which Georgia players get to speak to the media. Now, whether that's the right decision or not, I guess is in the eye of the beholder. But we saw Diego Pavia on with one of those, Barstool-style shows the other day. He's shooting off at the mouth. Now you got Castellanos shooting off at the mouth with On3 here. What a strange thing. And I don't know ultimately how much bulletin board stuff really does help. And sometimes the stuff we call bulletin board material actually probably isn't truly bulletin board material. This is, though. This is not just, I'm confident in my abilities and I think our team has a chance to win, which is sometimes what we paint as bulletin board material. This is, you don't have Nick Saban to save you. There's nothing you can do to stop me. If that's not already plastered on the walls in Tuscaloosa, I don't know what will be. And fair or not, what this feels like to me is another example of, it just seems like Mike Norvell has only a tenuous grip of control over his program. All of the defections and opt-outs and transfers after not making the playoff in 2023. Listen, that's a tough situation, kind of a unique situation. No one else had dealt with that before. But the sheer, implosion of the program after that, it seemed like they could have done a better job of preventing that from happening. And listen, I'm all for freedom of speech, I guess. But Florida State was done no favors by Castellanos saying these things. While it's somewhat interesting to have this out there in the universe, and we're talking about it right now, if you're Mike Norvell, I think it sort of speaks to the less than firm grip you have on the control of your program. Hard not to notice that. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And by the way, before we get ready to wrap things up here today, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Cercheros. Now, who knows what kind of grip Norvell has on his program, but you can get yourself a great grip on a delicious fresh Mex burrito from our friends at Cercheros, or one of those bowls, or the quesadillas, or anything else, whether it's for a catering event, you got a pool party going on, a birthday party, something like that, or if you want to stop by and enjoy it in the restaurant. There are more than 30 locations across the state of Georgia and the Southeast, and there are more on the way. So you're getting ready to think about tailgate parties coming up this fall. I would have our friends at Cercheros kind of cater one of those. The big 4th of July celebrations that are coming up. Listen, we think Cercheros is a great fit for that as well. You can take advantage of online ordering. You can get pickup or delivery. It's whatever your day-to-day needs sort of match with. They can kind of do something for you. It's fresh Mex, the made-to-order bowls, the burritos, the quesadillas, the nachos, tacos, so much more. The friendly Tex-Mex served every day right there. And it's the special touches they provide, which I always love. For a lot of people, it's, you ask for your veggies to be grilled up for you. In other words, they'll take them and they'll kind of put them on the grill, just kind of get them a little hotter, fresher tasting, that little extra touch to make whatever you're enjoying at Cercheros that much better. That's what they're all about. So you can find out more online. How about, I said 30 locations. Now they've grown to 40 locations. I told you, since they've been with us, we've been telling their story, the Cercheros growth has been amazing. So make sure you find out more online. It's Cercheros.com. That's Surcheros. Cercheros.com for more on that today. As we wrap up, we'll give a golden shoe. Our buddy George on tap, always so kind to shout out our sponsors, and he saw something he thought was funny, and we enjoyed this too. Of course, we're big fans of Dr. Pepper around here, and part of the appeal of Dr. Pepper is the aroma. Well, our friend George on tap shows us, in case anybody's looking for that perfect gift, how about a Dr. Pepper themed candle? I'd say that sounds pretty good to me. I love the way the Dr. Pepper smells. And a little scented Dr. Pepper style candle in your home, I'd say that is for those with exquisite taste indeed. And it looks good too. You love all of that. So we'll give Georgia on tap a golden shoe for that. And we'll give our friends at Dr. Pepper one there as well. Fun stuff there. What's not so fun if you're a lousy, stinking Gator is the beatdown you get at the hands of the Georgia Bulldogs. It's now been 1,690 days since Florida's beating Georgia in football. We love doing our Gatorator Updater. We love all of you being with us for it. And we'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You'll be happy to know. Had a nice lunch with our buddy Dari Payro yesterday. Good to see him from R.S. Andrews. Things are going great for them, and he's doing really well too. Getting excited about the fall. Dari already kind of making his plans for which Georgia games he's coming to and things like that. So a lot of good stuff going down there on that front. Let's find out what's going on with you here for a moment. Let's get some of your comments across all platforms. Hope you are all doing great today. Let's check in with DawgNation. You know what? Actually, let me check in with Facebook because I told them the other day I would start with them. So let me start with Facebook. Then we'll go to DawgNation.com after that. I did promise our Facebook friends that's what we would do. So let's do that right now. Okay, on Facebook here for a moment. Good to see him from R.S. Andrews. Mike Mazzell checking in. Oh, Jacob O'Neill calling me out. He says, let's see if he starts on Facebook the way that he said he would. Well, guess what, Jacob? That is indeed what I am doing. Indeed what I'm doing. Good to see Ryan Walker checking in. Brian Whitaker laughing about the Florida State-Alabama game. Yeah, boy, a lot of tension really on both sides of that for kind of different reasons for sure. Philip Jordan Wells likes the idea of a Dr. Pepper scented citronella candle. That's what keeps the bugs away. Is that what citronella does? Tino Calvino says that Castellanos is just saying what everybody else is thinking about Alabama, that without Nick Saban, they're kind of a question mark. I think that's true. I think that Castellanos, though, also takes it sort of the next level of I am confident enough to know that you're not going to be able to stop me. That's what I think doesn't quite work for a lot of people. It's like, from a evaluation standpoint, of course, we're still trying to figure out what Alabama is in a post-Nick Saban world, 100%. But we're also trying to figure out what Thomas Castellanos is too, because I don't know that Castellanos is, as he would describe it, great success in first games of seasons. I don't know that's quite resonated with so many of us necessarily. Joe Lawn Lavender checks in to say, go Dogs. Appreciate you being here, Joe. Good stuff. Mike Mazzell says, I must be taking Prevagen. I don't even know what that is. What is Prevagen? Do I sound weird? Do I sound weird today? I'm not. I don't have any health issues. I really take very little in the way of medicine. One way or another, this tank's sort of running the way that it always has. What is Prevagen? Is that a joke? Maybe I missed that. A lot of things go right past me. Cody BMW MC Dog checks in to say, I am so ready for this football season to start. I am too. Now, I don't wish away this summer. I do enjoy this summer. I enjoy going to the beach and being a part of pool and stuff like that. Going golf, playing fishing, things, or playing golf and going fishing. Enjoy all that kind of stuff. But listen, we're ready for the fall as well. And I tell you, Senior Dog 54 says that Prevagen is for memory loss. Maybe I should take that. Maybe I should take that. And maybe at one point in time I knew what Prevagen was for and I just forgot. Maybe that is the case. So, yeah, listen, a little brain fog every now and then. I'm probably guilty of some of that. But to go back to Cody's point about being excited about the season, I'll tell you how I know. I can, this sounds corny, I realize, but I can kind of feel it. Like if I'm reading some sort of college football story or something like that, if it hits me the right way, there's like a sort of a tingly sensation I get of, oh man, this is about to be here. And I just don't get that from any other sport. Like I love other sports. I mean, I love baseball, for instance, but I am not in January counting down the days till the baseball season starts. I'm happy when it gets here. I love the springtime. I love Masters. I love Major League Baseball opening day. I love it. I just don't count down to it. Now, some of you do, and that's awesome. But for me, that is not a countdown that I'm a part of. It's just not. My countdown mindset is around college football. And I don't mean necessarily official countdown because many of you know more about the number of weeks or days. I don't necessarily know that. I've only got room for kind of one official countdown in my life. But spiritually speaking, I am counting down the days before the start of the college football season. That is no doubt true. How about this? Rambo says he worked at Sears with one of Horace King's classmates, Clarence Pope. Nice guy. But what an interesting thing that is. Obviously, Horace King, a historic figure involved with the Georgia program, is the uncle of Khamari Brooks, who made his pledge to Georgia yesterday. So that's really interesting. How about working at Sears? I once worked at J.C. Penney. That was what, kind of among my first-ish jobs was working at J.C. Penney. That is a true story, by the way. I made $4 and something an hour, I think. Let's see what else is going on here at DawgNation.com. Yeah, Senior Dog 54, kind of remembering back on a horrible year it was for Florida State a year ago. Yeah, given how bad it was and given the fact that Castellanos is sort of coming in on that after having been in Boston College, I think a little bit of humility would have been the right thing. I think that sports has a way of punishing hubris, and this may end up being an example of that. Jamie Huff, interesting prediction. He believes that Jay Lamar, we talked about both Lamar and Derreck Cooper today. He believes that Jay Lamar is going to end up being the best running back in this class. Jamie, that's a really interesting prediction. Randy Hall wondering if the Dr. Pepper can will be a future gift from Dr. Pepper. They have given they've given me some cool stuff over the years. Our buddy Jonathan from Dr. Pepper is a great guy. He actually gave me a couple of Dr. Pepper shirts. I wore one of them on the cruise. They're like really nice shirts. I'm talking about like the really nice shirts. I wear them pretty good bit, to be honest with you. Jerry Popham checking in to say howdy. Jerry, glad you're here. There was also a thing where I got invited to, via Dr. Pepper, go to this it's almost like a catalog, and I was able to pick out a Dr. Pepper themed gift, and some of them were really nice. I'm a little bit dumb sometimes, I guess. I couldn't quite figure out how to order it, so I never got anything. But they had a lot of cool Dr. Pepper things, themed stuff. Let us see. Brian Whitaker's wife used to work at Goodies. That's based in Tennessee, right? I feel like we had a Goodies at one point in time, near where I lived. feel like we did have one of those. But that's based out of Tennessee, right? Not to be confused with the headache powder, by the way. At least I think that's what you're talking about. I believe there was a Goodies a retail store, not to be confused with the headache powder. Although I'll tell you this, I don't know why it is, and listen, like I said, don't consult me for medical advice. Those powders, to me, work so much better than anything else. It's just amazing how they work. And I don't know that scientifically, and I don't know if it's good for you or bad for you. All I know is if you've ever had headaches, especially if headaches were caused by your own decisions, if you get what I'm saying, those powders work amazing. I hadn't had one in a long time, but when I used to have them, they work. Especially like, was it Goodies or the other one that came with like the orange flavor? Oh my gosh, that thing worked. But like I said, don't consult me for medical advice because I have no idea. DT said he had a 9-month break from UGA, worked 3 jobs: lifeguard at an apartment complex pool, liquor store, do everything, and then a Sears Craftsman tool repair. The tools have 3 or 4 parts inside, period. A trained monkey could do that job. Yeah, I've never really been one to like put things together, but maybe I could put something like that together. Maybe that's the case. Never been a lifeguard. I don't think I swim well enough to be a lifeguard, I don't think. Senior Dog 54 says that Dr. Pepper's theme was drink one at 10, 2, and 4 back in the day. So like when I was a kid, they did have some like 10, 2, 4 bottles. I think at the time they were like the 1980s version of a throwback, because I remember asking like, what is this? And like my family told me about it. So I do remember 10, 2, 4 bottles, but I believe at the time they were a throwback to a previous era, I believe. I don't think that was contemporary. Let me get a few more Facebooks, then I'm going to go to YouTube. Yeah, Brian Whitaker and Brandon Porter talking about Goodies. I think our version of Goodies was probably Roses. We used to have, and like Roses, Roses had toys. And that's what I used to love about Roses. They had toys. In fact, Roses probably, it probably was what I thought of as the toy store. They had all kinds of stuff, but I didn't care about the rest of the stuff. I just like the toys. In Hall County, where I grew up, Roses was kind of the big thing, and they had toys, which I always thought was nice. UJ Marine says, imagine as a 19-year-old Marine, first cold weather training, there was 22 inches of snow, still snowing, and then it's minus 2 degrees outside with 20-mile-per-hour wind. As a kid from East Texas, I was determined I was out on cold weather. Yeah, no doubt. Because like the thing about like that tall of snow, and I've never been in 22 inches, but I have been in like, half a foot worth of snow. It's dangerous because your feet just sink right into it. It's dangerous. I mean, of course, I'm sure you have army boots on, or not army boots, but combat boots on, which is going to provide you some insulation and protection. But for just like a regular person who like lives in that level of snow, when you kind of just sink down into it, you're going to get hypothermia or whatever. Let me check on YouTube, see how they're doing. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson asking about Cercheros. Listen, if Cercheros took on any of those, we think that Cercheros would win. We think that Cercheros would win. Jonathan Aaron says, you dipped out yesterday and no show before the show. I'm beginning to think that you don't like your no, listen, I'm always liking you guys. I will tell you this, that we are coming up on 4th of July week next week, and we will be stepping away for that week. Kind of like my, vacation prior to, once we get back on the other side of that, we'll be ready for SEC Media Days, the kind of run through the rest of the summer and the start of the season. So our final days off of the summer do take place next week. So we're going to be pre-recorded on Monday, pre-recorded on Tuesday, and kind of a combination of pre-recorded and live on Wednesday and Thursday. No show at all on Friday because that is our nation's birthday. And then I'll be back on the other side of that, and we won't have a day off again until February. We'll go week after Independence Day through President's Day, and we won't take a single day off. And we never have, we never will. That's just what we do. So that for us we've been talking about summer cadence and things like that. Summer cadence ends other side of next week. And at that point in time, it is on and popping. That's the story there. Paul Moon says, I missed all the Miami trolls. I think that's funny. I mean, like the one thing that, I know it probably drives y'all crazy more so than it does me, but, because we're always here, we have a big audience, we're going to attract, certain, non-Georgia fans, which I don't typically mind, but I would say the Miami ones are the most interesting just because, you can sort of tell who's not used to having like any success. They're perhaps an example of that. RKD says that Cerchero's better than some of its competitors. Better to me, for sure. And I tell you, people that have also experienced it have been saying good things here too. DMart42 says everybody should have to work in the food service industry for at least a year. It'd create a lot less rude people. I think that's probably true. I've not done food service. Now, I do hopefully have a reputation of being kind to people who are serving me food. Hopefully I have a reputation of being kind to them because I'm very grateful. They're providing a great service. But I do think that is true, is that when you have been one who has served, and hopefully we all have our own version of serving others, but when you've been one who has served, I do think it gives you a little bit of a different attitude about service overall. I think that's probably true. Foster Moss, he is 100% right about this. This is 100% true. I think he's joking, but this is true. So a few years ago, it's been a couple of years now, and this is one of the most amazing things that I've ever experienced. I don't have any explanation of this whatsoever. Somebody sent in a picture of me. They had been watching, I guess, on like the WWE, kind of what we think of as like the WWE network. It's on Peacock now. They're watching old wrestling. WWE owns all the old WCW stuff. And there was a time, and I very rarely got to do anything like this, but there was a time circa 1995 or so, it may have been 96, 95, 96, something like that. May have been 96, 95 or 96, where I got to go to Monday Nitro at the old Omni. This was shortly after Nitro had started. It was only a 1-hour show. This was shortly after Nitro had started, so I guess it would have been 95. Shortly after it started, it was at the Omni, which obviously is a building that doesn't exist anymore. And I had the luckiest thing in the world. I got to sit on the front row. I'm talking about the front row for Monday Nitro. And so I was all over TV that night. All over TV. And Foster Moss is joking because somebody sent in this screenshot of, BA, I was watching this old episode of Nitro. Is this you? And it was. Now, listen, I'd love to tell you I look exactly the way that I did in 1995. The truth is I probably don't. But apparently I look enough like myself. This person recognized me, sent in the picture. And in this picture, I am wearing a tie. Now, I kept the tie on in celebration of the Four Horsemen because, Ric Flair was always dressed up. So I kept the tie on in celebration of the Four Horsemen. But as Foster is, I think, joking, but it is 100% true, I had gotten off of JCPenney to come to Raw. I'm not Raw, it was Nitro. To come to Nitro. And that's why I was wearing the tie, because back then we wore a tie to work there. People don't wear a tie to, court these days, but you did back then to work at JCPenney. So still have my tie on, went to Monday Nitro, on the front row. It was Hogan versus Flair on TV. I believe that was the first televised match between those two legends. But I think Foster is joking, but that is the truth. That's what else. Jonathan Aaron says he's been noticing that the chat bots have not been in here in a while. Did you clear your browser history before the net? Listen, my browser history's got nothing. Some of y'all's browser history, I don't know. My browser history has no problems. No problems with my browser history. But I am glad to know there are no bots. I will say this, though. This is a little bit of an observation I've made. And every now and then I just sort of give y'all random stuff. This is extraordinarily random. I am getting this close to saying that social media followers no longer matter. I'm getting pretty close to saying that social media followers are totally irrelevant to the social media profile you seek to have. Because here's what I'm here to tell you. I get supposedly like 10 new Twitter followers a day. And the best that I can tell is none of these are real. Or they're real accounts, but like they're like somehow like bot follows. Let me see. Yeah, so it says here I've got 4 new followers. This one's a real person. This one is not. This one is not. And this one is not. And it's that way all day long, where it's like, hey, you got 10 new followers. But like one of them might be real, and like 8 of them are fake. And the reason why I would say that doesn't matter is because you also see the situation now on X where people kind of use the For You tab. A lot of people do anyway. I really don't, because a lot of that is just stuff I don't need to be seeing. But a lot of people do. And so therefore on the For You tab, not everything that shows up in For You is a big account. You know, some of them are just sort of normal sized accounts. Same way with like Instagram too, where some of the videos that go viral are not from large accounts. In other words, producing good content, which I barely produce anything anymore, but producing good content, I would say, has become completely detached from your number of followers. There are these big major legacy media. They've got supposedly like 6-digit followers and they get like 2 likes per post. So clearly that's a disconnect. And I would say that generally speaking, like good content does not require a lot of followers anymore. A lot of new followers seem to not be real anyway. And big followings does not produce big views. So do with that what you will. Perhaps you don't even care. But it is something I've kind of noticed. Brian Jordan says, how do we know this is really BA? Here is the one thing I'd like to believe. And I think that I'd like to believe I'm just quirky enough, just weird enough. You know, my certain imperfections, I would say they are just weird enough that I do think it'd be a little bit hard to replicate me via artificial intelligence. Perhaps not impossible, unfortunately, but a little bit hard. By the way, some people kind of enjoyed our comparison yesterday of Kirby Smart and Caitlin Clark. They thought that was kind of good, which I'm always glad to hear. Let me get a couple more here on Facebook, see how they're doing. By the way, Kent Holcomb coming up on 51 years of marriage. How exciting is that? That's awesome. Believe it or not, some of y'all may be surprised to hear this. We are well over 20. We got married in 2002. What is this? So we're 23 years. Would have just celebrated our 23rd year of marriage. So we're only a couple years away from a what you call like a silver anniversary. We are not one to like do. Now, thankfully, we do lots of fun things all the time, but we are not big on like, you know, anniversaries, things like that. In fact, I think my son played baseball on our anniversary, and my daughter, you know, did whatever she was doing. So we're just running to the same stuff we're always running to. But for 25, you got to do something for that. You got to think. You feel like you got to do something for that. Brian Whitaker says, I have found myself on WWE Network a couple of times in the crowd, taking my boys to Raw in a couple of weeks in Birmingham. That'll be really fun. So in a previous era, around that time, I really was a big wrestling fan. I went to a couple of WrestleManias, and there was like a WrestleMania book that came out at the time. You know how they would do like coffee table books? I don't know if they still make coffee table books like they used to. But it was like a coffee table book for those who wanted a kind of a WrestleMania coffee table book for your decorations. Big, oversized book. And on the back of it was kind of a panoramic crowd shot of WrestleMania 14, which was one of the WrestleManias that I attended. And one day in like a bookstore, I just like went through in the entire crowd because I kind of had an idea of where I was sitting and found myself in the back of this. So I did do that one time. And I'm sure my face has probably popped up other wrestling events that maybe I wasn't aware of. But yeah, that's been a thing that's happened before. Let me go back to DawgNation.com and see how they're doing. Oh Lord, they're talking about stuff I can't. They're talking about stuff I can't get into. I got to see our buddy Matt Rukavin in there today. DT says he learned about Goody's powder from Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream. He pushed stand back powder, which was enough to get me to try pain powder. Yeah, I remember the old Dusty Rhodes commercials. What was the car dealership where he would like to slam his fist? I bet this is on YouTube. Some of y'all should go watch this. When I was a kid, Dusty Rhodes endorsed a car dealership, like a truck dealership or something. And then when he's doing the commercials, he's like pounding his fist on the hood like he's denting the hood of these vehicles. You got to buy this truck or something like that. That's great. That was fantastic stuff. DT finding it hard to believe that there's a WrestleMania coffee table book, but there was. There were lots of those, I guess. Rambo says that Vance Spafford kind of reminded me of Ladd McConkey. And he says, but we also already have Landon Roldan. Yeah. I mean, Spafford was one of those guys I never got all that really well acquainted with. Some of the guys from a long way away, I just, I'm not saying I didn't like him or anything like that. I just never quite got as moved by him as maybe others did. But there were a lot of people who really liked him. Rambo says, I can't wait to see how these football players do 2-a-days at 100-plus degrees. We don't really have 2-a-days anymore, but they will be having heat. Throughout the years, Kirby Smart has talked about that, about so-and-so practices better indoors than he does outdoors. I mean, getting used to the heat's hard. Now, I'll tell you this, my son's also going through some of that right now, too. They're doing some work out in the heat, and he's having to get used to all of that. Ray Allen, by the way, saying he's working on 58 years of marriage with his beautiful bride. Ray, that's worth celebrating. That's awesome. That is awesome. By the way, Jacob O'Neill says he was still in school in 2002. Well, I hadn't been out of school very long in 2002. What did I graduate? December 99, I guess, I got out of school. So we were pretty young when we got married. Okay, so Tom Stymus, that's what it was. Here's the Tom Stymus Truck Center. Now, this is a free ad for Tom Stymus. I don't know they're still here. Okay, it says the address is in Bradenton, Florida. I thought this was in Atlanta. I guess I just didn't know. It says Bradenton, Florida. But so Dusty will do these ads, and he'll just be pounding his fist on these hoods. They're great commercials. I always thought Tom Stymus was in Atlanta. I feel like they were on here. Maybe Tom Stymus had Tom Stymus Truck Center. I knew it was some sort of thing that sounded like that. But I thought that Tom Stymus, maybe he had an empire. Maybe he had dealerships all over. All right, get ready to go here in a minute. Jacob O'Neill says Brian Whitaker and Jacob O'Neill saying that that I circled back to Facebook. He says, we're like that bad toy you can't stop picking up. Well, no, listen, I love my Facebook comments. I do. As I said before, and this is not critical, I would say that some of y'all comment a little bit less frequently than you once did. So sometimes they're just sort of less in the way of Facebook comments these days. But Brian Whitaker, Philip Jordan Wells also mentioning IGA. That's a food store, right? I guess the only thing I know about that is it's the Luke Combs song, right? And the IGA. Okay, I'm being told. Listen, you gotta understand something. We have a crack research staff that's just standing by to do anything. It could be like what bowl game Georgia played in some random year in the 1970s, or it could be like the Tom Steimus Truck Center. We are led to believe there may have been a Tom Steimus location in Forsyth County, but as a former Forsyth County resident, okay, yeah. So here, all right. So we're watching this live here right now. The video's not live, but we're watching it live. So this is what Dusty would do. And for those of you who are super young, this is Cody Rhodes' dad. And this is kind of the commercials that were on. Yeah, so like that's Dusty in the truck right there, kind of shaking that thing up right there. So like this was on TV a lot. Like back then, even the commercials were good. I mean, that's kind of like my memory. Like I was such a TV obsessed kid because even the commercials were entertaining. And this is more like free ads than we've ever given anybody. I'm assuming there are no more Tom Steimuses. Look how good Dusty looks in that picture, by the way. I think this is younger than me. There's no way Dusty Rhodes looked like that in the commercials that I was watching. Because Dusty Rhodes as a wrestler did not look like that. Unless that jeans and t-shirt is doing a lot of work for Dusty. That's him slapping the hood, though. That is what he did. But that is not what Dusty. So Dusty must have done these commercials for a long time, because the version of Dusty Rhodes I saw doing those commercials was not doing all of that. By the way, UGA Marine and DT and others celebrating Cody Chaffins for being very quick on the trigger on getting the Tom Steimus commercials up on the air there. Yeah, that's very good. Jacob O'Neill says he's never seen that commercial yet. So, Jacob, you already mentioned being a lot younger. I would say that we live in an era now where commercials are not very good. But back in the day, man, commercials were amazing. So many good commercials. They weren't all as good as Dusty Rhodes slamming the hood of a truck, but they were oftentimes good. I think what it is we had a lot of there were a lot of low budget cable commercials, because cable would have inventory to sell. So if you wanted to advertise on, like, let's say ESPN, well, you could go pay to be on ESPN and be across the entire country, which is pretty expensive. Or you could go to like local, like when I was a kid, I think we had Cablevision. Now Cablevision's like mostly just a New York thing. But I want to say back in the day, we were on Cablevision, I want to say. And you had like the first people had cable, which we didn't have, but you could pay for like local cable. Local cable had inventory to sell. And so you had some very low budget commercials, which were amazing. All right. We are going to go. Before we go, let's see anything else. Brandon Potter also kind of weighing in on Vance Spafford. Yeah, like I said before, there are a lot of people who like him, but I'm really happy with what Georgia is going after in the receiver position. And as others have kind of pointed out, I really like what they brought in last year, which is also kind of part of this too. Like, I don't know that I've seen a lot of, the Spafford news one way or another is just not drawing a very strong reaction, I would say. All right, back on YouTube. Yeah, Chef Jay Bowen also remembers the Wolfman and Donna. Yeah, those were commercials. And, I want to say Gallery Furniture is still open in Gainesville. I think that's true. I want to say, maybe we'll get them as a sponsor. I want to say, and by the way, they would have wrestling in their parking lot. That's the other thing too. It's like, you had like good promotions. Like I want to say, Gallery Furniture would have like wrestling in the parking lot. like Tommy Rich and people like that. I've said it before, like no better decade to be a kid in than the 80s. I feel like the 90s great era to be a teenager. I feel like the 80s great era to be a child. Really good era to be a child was the 1980s. Jonathan Aaron asking about Georgia players at media days. So I'd say that my prediction on this is, I was thinking more about this the other day. I'd go, and I may reserve the right to change my mind, but I'm going to go Delp, CJ Allen, Christian Miller. Delp, CJ Allen, Christian Miller. I could also see Dalen Everett getting pegged. Oscar Delp, CJ Allen, Christian Miller. That's my three. That's my pick for the three. Although I could maybe see a Dalen Everett slip in there. Andy Perry went to school with Donna. That's really cool. I knew a lot of people who knew her. I don't think I ever knew Donna. And that's the other thing, too. It's like the people from the commercials got famous. Like that was a famous person back in that time. Of course, as Free Durden points out, the Wolfman's no longer with us. Frank Patterson predicts Delp, Everett, and Christian Miller. So he has CJ Allen out and Everett and Miller in, which could be true. Chef Jay Bowen also pointing out that the Wolfman's beard game was strong. Yeah, I mean, like if you're gonna have a name like the Wolfman, you better be bringing it from the beard category, and he did. For some reason, that also makes me think about like Joe Pedicino and Bonnie Blackstone. I guess they must have been sponsors on that. I think they probably were. Which one time when I was a kid, I went to see Bonnie Blackstone and Tommy Rich at the Curtis Mathis in Gainesville. You're talking about dating yourself with the reference. That was a big weekend for a young fella back in the 1980s. By the way, we're getting so how about this? Kaylee Manziel's grandfather also worked on the phone line, worked on Dusty Rhodes' phone line. Like, so connection to Dusty Rhodes right there. That's amazing. That's really cool. That's awesome stuff right there. I love that. And we love Kaylee's family, of course. That's really fun. All right, anything else before we go? Really good stuff. All right, y'all have a great day. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price. Promise. Had a great time with Dari yesterday. He talked about how hot it is right now and how busy they are getting people in their air conditioning units tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You love all of that. They'll get you tuned up and keep you cool and comfortable all summer long. So find out more online, rsandrews.com. And if your water heater goes out, they can also solve those plumbing emergencies for you too. So find them there on that. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.